I like boy failure Michael Afton. Sue me, all right?
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host of the toast, Ryan Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, as far as the topic goes today, we are, as of recording this, let's see, it's Sunday, May 25th. Secret of the Mimic comes out on June 13th. We are about a week and a half away from the next major game in Five Nights at Freddy's. And I wanted to take the next two podcasts, unless we get some mind-shattering information. I want to take the next two podcasts and just try to answer as many questions as we have before Secret of the Mimic that aren't necessarily related to Secret of the Mimic. Now, I'm not going to not answer Secret of the Mimic questions. I think the first one I've pulled up is a question on Secret of the Mimic, but I know I have a big backlog of questions, and I know I'm going to get a lot more questions after Secret of the Mimic comes out. So I thought the best thing I can do is take today and just answer questions. And I think I changed how my camera records, which means I need increased lighting, and I forgot to do that, but I just did it now. By the way, the camera should look better. Let me know if anyone notices a difference. This might be another Rye is way too focused on the visual and audio quality of the videos when most people aren't going to notice a difference, but to me it looks night and day. So let me know if you notice a difference. I'm recording, it's the same webcam, but instead of, for the people who know, and in case, content creators out there, here's some advice. If you use OBS to record, everyone recommends CBR for streaming, which essentially it's constant bitrate. It keeps your bitrate constant. It makes it easier to stream. It makes it more stable, and Twitch likes it a lot. However, there are better options for recording, and I've switched over to the better options for recording. Let me double check what it's called before I give you just wrong information. Yeah, I've switched over to CQP, which I forget exactly what. Now, this is the rate control for the encoder, by the way. I forget exactly what that stands for, but essentially it's keeping the bitrate at a certain quality level as much as it can. And it just makes for a cleaner video that looks better bitrate wise, which isn't super important for YouTube because the YouTube bitrate is already kind of low, but it's still something that makes it just tune a bit more. And then I went into my camera settings, changed the ISO, changed the shutter angle. So I did a lot of tweaks to make my webcam look as good as it can. Because again, I'm still just using the Elgato Facecam Pro. I don't have a mirrorless. I don't have a real mirrorless camera. That would be $1,000 even to get one used, and I don't have that kind of money. So I'm trying to make the most with the webcam I have, which I think this looks fairly good. Is it a full camera? No, but this is the best we're gonna get. Anyway, tech stuff nobody really cares about aside. Questions. If you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into freddyfazbearpizzapodcast@gmail.com. That's in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. But like I said, I've got a big backlog of questions that I have not gotten to, and I want to try to knock out as much of that backlog as possible before Secret of the Mimic, because I have a feeling after it, all of our questions are going to be about this. So it's kind of this is the best time to do it. That being said, our first question is about Secret of the Mimic. First question coming from Connor, him. After watching back the Secret of the Mimic trailer, I noticed that the voiceover says that Edwin Murray went missing. That's one of the reasons we're going to retrieve his things in the warehouse. I was wondering what your opinion was on where he went exactly. I would say it was Mimic related, but his body was never found unless we find him in the game. Thank you for your question. It's a great one, because if the books are fully true to the games, Edwin is alive. Right? Edwin lives to the Pizzaplex because he's involved in the storyteller, and he dies in that story. So if the books are fully accurate to the games, Edwin isn't dead, right? Gone missing isn't just we haven't found his body. Gone missing is literally he's MIA. We don't know where he went. I'm assuming that is true until proven otherwise in the game. Maybe we find Edwin's body, and that would fully disconnect the second half of these books from the games, and we'd have to rework what we know. But assuming Edwin is alive, I kind of always assumed he just became a hermit for a few years and then tried to do business again, right? Because we know that after the death of his son David, he goes into this grief spiral, beats up the Mimic, and then it like cuts to black. We don't know what happens after that. I've always assumed he beats the Mimic, see what his become, and he either like puts himself into a mental hospital, moves far away to like isolate himself. He does something. He's made a lot of money. He does something that's essentially, I'm just going to take this money, become a hermit somewhere, not talk to anybody, and live out the rest of my days in misery, right? I assume that's kind of his MO. And then so much further down the line, he goes to do business again. Because we do know from the storyteller that he tried to make other businesses until he eventually ended up back at Fazbear's, working for them directly now as their creative team. So like he does do a job later in life. So I think he probably takes the next 10 to 20 years, is miserable, and then like, well, I still have the rest of my life ahead of me. I have to make something out of this. And then he starts making businesses again. As far as what he immediately does after the Mimic and or Secret of the Mimic, no idea. My best guess is that he's in some like misery pit until, he gets over it. Cause to be fair, look, Edwin's a bad father. It is rough to go through that. So I can imagine that he is not having a good time. But, he does eventually start trying to work towards something new. But thank you for your question, Connor. Our next one, it's actually two questions that are very related from two different people, so I'm answering them kind of in the same paragraph, right? So our first question comes from Lazaret, she, her. We know from Sister Location that Funtime Chica exists and was rented the whole time when Mike was at Sister Location. This means she wasn't scooped together with all the Funtimes. Does it mean that she was never part of Ennard, and there was a remnant-haunted robo-chicken roaming around Hurricane up until Pizza Simulator? I'm not even sure you absolutely have to buy her to get the arson ending in Pizza Simulator, so theoretically, she may still be active during Security Breach. And since she's possessed by collective remnant of either the MCI, DCI, or children killed by the Funtimes, it means that someone never would have been able to pass to the afterlife and is still active. Thank you for your question. I also got this one from Kale, he, him. I realize that Funtime Chica is not in Sister Location when they get scooped. However, if you believe in Molten MCI, that means there are still pieces of the MCI kids out there in Funtime Chica. What are your thoughts on this? I personally believe Molten MCI, but after thinking about this, I don't know. So yeah, great questions all around. Funtime Chica is a big, thorn in the side for any important theory about the Funtimes, because she is so separate and only visibly appears by the time of Pizza Simulator. The way I'd been thinking about it, and this kind of feels like a cop-out answer, right? Because to be fair, Funtime Chica is a Funtime and was likely involved in the experiments. But when we're looking at the Sister Location bunker, every animatronic has a dedicated space except for Funtime Chica. Ballora has Ballora Gallery. Funtime Foxy is the Funtime Auditorium would be Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Chica. Is that what we're supposed to assume? Because when I look at the Sister Location map, right? When I look at the Sister Location map, let me get it labeled. Oh, yeah, no, I guess, because it's Circus Baby, Ballora, and the Funtimes. I guess the Funtime Auditorium is for all three Funtime animals. So what I was going to say is that Chica doesn't have a spot on the map, and I feel like Scott just kind of forgot about her, and that's why she's not involved in all of this. But at the same time, right, if it's Ballora Gallery, Circus Gallery, and Funtime Auditorium, Funtime Freddy's in the breaker room. He's never in, his own dedicated space. So we probably can assume that the Funtime Auditorium was a place for Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Chica. Whereas Circus Gallery was just for Circus Baby, and Ballora Gallery was just for Ballora, for whatever reason. So yeah, I think Funtime Chica is just a big question mark. Now, is it something that disproves Molten MCI, Molten DCI, or even Molten Funtimes? The idea that the remnant that the Funtimes collected from doing private parties gets put into Ennard. I don't think it does. Now, this might just be cope, but when I think of this whole situation, I think of So when I think of this whole situation, I think of private party functionality, right? Like, we know that Fazbear's doesn't really care about safety, but we also know that Fazbear's will close down if there are too many public accidents. We know this as a consistent fact, right? The Bite of 83 eventually closes down Fredbear's. The Bite of 87 closes down FNAF 2. The Missing Child Incident closes down the original Freddy's location. So we know that if there are public accidents, these places shut down. So when we think of the private parties, it's important to note that, like both of these questions say, Funtime Chica is rented out for the entirety of Sister Location. So when we look at the Sister Location animatronics, all of them are incredibly dangerous. Circus Baby seems to have some sort of conscious mind to her and is able to hold back, but like Ballora, Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, all of these things they can't wait to murder. They are so excited to murder. All they want to do is murder. And if William knows this from doing these remnant experiments, renting them out to a private party seems like a bad idea. You need these private parties to still go through to be able to fund your experiments. My thought process, and this might just be cope, but my explanation for where Funtime Chica fits into all of this is maybe Funtime Chica wasn't injected with Remnant at all. Maybe Funtime Chica was meant to just be you will go out and be rented for parties while I experiment on everybody else. Because again, she's rented out for this entire week. She's rented out very frequently on that little chart that we got. The chart that, frankly, the only reason we know Funtime Chica exists in the first place by the time of Sister Location. And when we see her in FNAF 6, like you've mentioned, FNAF 6, you can purchase Funtime Chica, not necessary for any ending, and not aggressive. As far as we're aware, up until Help Wanted 2, Funtime Chica has never been aggressive. Funtime Chica is just an animatronic in the background. So when I think of Funtime Chica, I think she might be the go-to, like someone calls, hey, we want to rent Circus Baby. Oh, sorry, Circus Baby is busy. Funtime Chica's available, though, and then they rent out Funtime Chica, get the revenue, use the revenue for the experiments. So my thought process would be, because Funtime Chica was rented out so much by the time of Sister Location, where all the other animatronics are very deadly and really want to murder, maybe she didn't because she never was injected with Remnant. Maybe, it's possible she was up on the docket next, right? Because we see that the other animatronics were being rented out before Sister Location. But during Sister Location, it seems like they're not being rented out. Unless, it's possible. No, because I hear the idea that, we're only going at night. Maybe the animatronics are being rented out during the day, and they're brought back at night for us to work on. While that is possible, it's weird then that Funtime Chica never shows up during gameplay, which would mean she's being rented out at night, too. So I think the idea is that if she's being rented out during Sister Location, anyone else who would be being rented out would also be missing or absent during those nights. But during those nights, everyone else is present and accounted for. So I think what it really comes down to is maybe at the time Scott didn't think of the implications, and you always got to consider the implications. But the retroactive explanation, I would think, is that, and maybe this is what FNAF 6 is telling us, because Scott always says he likes to use future games to explain past questions. I think Funtime Chica being a docile, purchasable animatronic in FNAF 6 is Scott's way of telling us that she was never injected with Remnant. So even by the time of FNAF 6, she is not aggressive. So I think that's the explanation, is that Funtime Chica was rented out to make money for Sister Location to fund the experiments, so she wasn't injected with Remnant, so she would be a guaranteed safe animatronic for these parties, so Circus Baby's party and rental wouldn't be shut down. That's my thoughts on that. Is that cope? Probably, but that's the only rational explanation I can think of. It's either that or, like you've said, there's just a possessed Funtime Chica wandering the streets. Which is possible, but thank you for your questions, Lazaret and Kale. Our next question comes from Neo, he, they, she. Did you know, and this is going to be a short one, did you know that Patient 46 uses female pronouns in other languages? I think that indicates that it's not Dr. Rabbit, but possibly Vanny. Thank you for your question. I think this comes down to one of the misinformation bits from Scott. Right, we know for a fact that the story of Security Breach was mishandled by Scott Cawthon. He admitted in the interview that He did not tell Steelwool the full story he was trying to tell. He just gave them pieces, and they had to put the pieces in and hope that it made sense. Now, again, as I always say, this is not to say that Security Breach should be thrown out. Scott then immediately followed up with, Security Breach is the game we have. That's the game we have in front of us. We're just trying to course correct moving forward. So the way that I've been taking that is if there's very small or minor details that conflict with lore we've gotten after Security Breach, I'm much more inclined to believe the lore we've gotten after Security Breach more than the small detail that conflicts with it. So this is a perfect example, I think. In English, Patient 46 is not referred to by any pronouns, but in certain languages, certain words are gendered, like Spanish or German. Like, there are gendered words that get gendered articles, like the, that, right? So because of that, in certain languages, they needed to have a gender for this terminology. And if Steelwool wasn't given the proper story by Scott, and then they sent it off to a translation team, the translation team just gets a slew of therapy logs to translate. And they know for a fact that the other patient is Vanessa. So when they get all these logs, we've figured out that it's patient 46 and because of the log of the number. But if you send it off to a translation team and you say, hey, I need you to translate all of these therapy transcripts, they're not going to be looking at the file name and being like, oh, well, this is patient 46. And they're going to go, oh, here's text. I will translate that for you. And then when it gets sent back to Steelwool, when they review the copy, they were never told who patient 46 was. So they look at it and go, okay, that looks good to me. And so it's a very minor detail that that patient 46 is given not female pronouns necessarily, but the nouns around patient 46 are gendered female. I think it's much, 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 much more likely that the translation team was just going off of the fact that the other patient is Vanessa, assumed all of this was Vanessa, and then translated it accordingly. And the reason I believe that's the case is because, like I've mentioned, Scott and Steelwool have been course-correcting the lore since Security Breach. And since Security Breach, we have gotten book, interactive novel, ruin, example after example that Gregory was involved in this. So many examples that Gregory was involved in this, to the point where in the story GGY, we get a character who's supposed to be Gregory, who's literally killing guidance counselors. So I think the thing that makes the most sense here is that Gregory is patient 46, and the translations are slightly incorrect because of a lack of information at the time. I think that's the best we can look at this. Now, that is to say, if you see this translation, you go, this is confirmation that patient 46 is female, and therefore we should look into that avenue, that's valid. I'm not here to say that you can't do that. I'm just saying that's why I don't. And that's my opinion on that. But thank you for your question, Neo. Our next question comes from Aaron, he, they. I've been obsessively watching your theories about Gregory and Dr. Rabbit, and I was curious to hear a longer explanation about your thoughts on the Gregory you hear in the elevator for the bad ending of Ruin. For example, do you think it was actually Gregory at any point? Could it have maybe been Dr. Rabbit? I think it can go either way, but I'm super unsure and want to hear your perspective. Maybe some supporting evidence for each side. Thank you so much. Thank you for your question, Aaron. So my thoughts on the Gregory at the end of Ruin, because obviously up until we get to the Mimic, all of that Gregory is the Mimic. I mean, it throws the walkie-talkie at us. It says, I'm Gregory. We know that makes total sense. I would say when looking at Gregory at the end of Ruin, I think there's really only one possible debate. I think right after we meet the Mimic, we go into the cave, we get the walkie-talkie, and Gregory's like, finally, I patched through, you're not supposed to be there. I think that has to be Gregory. First of all, the Mimic threw the walkie-talkie at us. So, it doesn't have a walkie-talkie anymore. Granted, it totally could have picked it up after we run, right? It's just on the floor. We didn't bring it with us. So, it could have picked it up after the fact. However, in that moment when we're talking, it's currently fighting Roxy. So unless, like, you'd think you'd hear the fight, Roxy, any of that, if that Gregory right then is still the mimic. Where it's like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna, but especially the fact that Gregory is giving us correct directions to get away from the mimic, it kills us when it catches us. So it's trying to kill us, right? Then if it was Gregory, you'd think it would give us incorrect directions, which is further why and because the Gregory in this moment is helping us escape the mimic and giving us correct directions to get to the elevator, that's why I've always been partial to the other side of the debate that we're about to get to. Because I think the only debatable moment of is this really Gregory is when you're in the elevator. Once you get in the elevator, you start talking to Gregory over the intercom as you're going up. And then there's that moment of mic feedback. And then Gregory has the mimic can't escape. It's too dangerous to open this avenue. I'm sorry, Cassie. And then the elevator drops, right? So when we're looking at this whole setup, I think up until that mic feedback, it pretty much has to be Gregory. Because, like I've mentioned, the mimic is actively fighting Roxy when you start talking to Gregory, and the directions you get from Gregory are accurate and help you escape the mimic, the thing trying to kill you. Then you get into the elevator, and it's still there's been no break. You just saw the mimic chasing after you. But once you've been in the elevator for a little bit, there's that mic feedback, and it switches. Now, I think when that mic feedback happened, the mimic retakes over communication. Because if you remember, Gregory says, I've been trying to reach you, but I couldn't get a hold of you. I think that's because the mimic is interrupting the line of communication in some way. How? I don't know. I don't know how. But it's weird that Gregory can reach you best at the deepest part of the Pizzaplex rather than any other time previously. And I think that is because of the mimic's influence somehow. So this is all to say that if there's a mic feedback reestablished takeover, why is that happening? Well, I always point to how the elevator could fall in the first place. The elevator falls. Duh. But the elevator is powered by a generator in the basement, right? The elevator, when we look at the construction of the elevator, we're using a Faz wrench to turn it on, and that console is wired up to a generator in the basement. And we're heading up in a very old, very like mechanical, not electrical elevator to get to the top. And then Gregory over an intercom is like, I'm sorry, elevator stops and falls. There's only two ways that an elevator like this could fall. The cable pulling it up was cut, but it looks like it's a gear thing. Or power was shut off and there's no safety because it's a shitty elevator. If the power was shut off, the power is in the basement, on a generator, right where we left the mimic. So I think the thing that makes the most sense here is the mimic tries to get us in the elevator, it can't. So now it's trying to figure out how to catch Cassie and get out, so it's reestablishing that communication, finally takes over, does the thing it's been doing the whole game, manipulates us to not trust Gregory anymore, and then shuts off the generator. So if somehow Cassie survives the fall, she won't trust her only ally and be an easier target. I think that just like is the way it is. I get that it's possible that Gregory for some reason was like, bye Cassie. But I doubt that for two reasons. One, at this point, we're fairly certain Gregory isn't under the influence of Glitchtrap anymore, so why would he try to kill Cassie? But two, if Gregory was so sure that it's not safe for the mimic to escape, why did he lead us directly to the elevator in the first place? If he didn't want the mimic to escape, he could have just, once he knew the mimic was there, been like, well, sorry, Cassie, I can't let it escape. Best of luck. Hangs up. Right? But he knows, he's like, that's the mimic. It's dangerous. You have to run. I will help you get out. He guides us to the elevator. We get in the elevator. He talks to us in the elevator, and then suddenly is like, although I will say, bud, it's not safe for you to use the elevator, so I'm going to kill you. It doesn't make sense. But it makes a lot more sense if it was, thank God she got into the elevator. All right, Cassie, so here's the... Cassie? Cassie, can you hear me? Meanwhile, on Cassie's end, Gregory betrays her. And the only way to shut off the power would be to turn off the generator that the mimic is directly next to. So I think it just makes so much more sense for that mic feedback to be the mimic reestablishing the communication dominance that it had throughout the game. And I don't think it makes sense for Gregory to help us and then heel turn to being a danger to us. I just don't think that makes sense. So that's my perspective on it. So thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Letty, she, her. If the original FNAF games are in-universe games created by the indie developer Fazbear hired, how do we explain the secret minigames that reveal specific things about the lore? Thank you for your question. I've kind of been under the assumption, so this goes off of the help wanted information we got, that at least FNAF 1 through 6 were created by an indie developer for Fazbear Entertainment to smear the historical, like the real things that happened, and make it seem fake. And I say 1 through 6 because it's definitely at least 1 through 3, because those appear by name in Help Wanted, and Steve Snodgrass in the books makes the first 3 and gets partway through 4. And in Help Wanted, there's part of 4. There is Ennard, who would only be known if Sister Location was a public game. Ennard is not a character, that is an amalgamation Michael Afton saw. And there are Scrap Baby plushes, which would imply that FNAF 6 is part of this as well. But again, this isn't to say none of this happened. This is to say that Scott and Steelwool are kind of giving themselves an out if they have to retcon minor details from the original games. So back to your question. How would you explain the secret minigames that revealed specific things about the lore? I would say there's 2 possibilities here. Either all of those secret minigames are not in the in-universe version of the games. Because to be fair, as far as I'm aware, none of them are referenced in Help Wanted or the Pizzaplex and Security Breach or even Help Wanted 2, right? They're not directly mentioned. And if that is true, then those secret minigames might be the things that we get that don't exist in universe, which then means they're even more trustworthy. That's totally possible. The other possibility is if they are in universe, then that's just something Fazbear told him to add. They were like, make it secret, make it hard to find, but include this information. If that's true, it doesn't mean that they're untrustworthy, but it means they should be put under the same scrutiny that all of the games are. For my own sanity, so far, as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen any direct references to any of the secret minigames from FNAFs 1 through 6, outside of, like, similar characters, right? Like, the fact that Freddy exists doesn't mean that Save Them was referenced, you know what I mean? So until we see, like, a reference to that pixel art, or Give Gifts, Give Life, being verbally mentioned, you know, like, unless we have a reference like that, I'm more than willing to assume that the secret minigames are IRL only and not in the Fazbear in-universe version of those games. Is that naive to think that? Only time will tell. But that's kind of the mental space I've been in to work around that honestly issue. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Autumn, she, her. Hey, I was watching a video where they play FNAF World, and I realized the revival item is gift boxes, which took me way too long to make the realization. I really hope I'm not the only one where it took forever to make that connection. Thank you for your question. You're not alone, right? So for anyone who didn't catch that, the revival item in FNAF World is a gift box, aka give gifts, give life, right? I think FNAF World is really well crafted in referencing the rest of the franchise, and I think in a way that's where a lot of supporting evidence from FNAF World comes from. I think a good example of this, when I made my theory that Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy are the agony reflections of Charlie and Cassidy respectively, which I still really like that theory, whether or not I think it's accurate. I still really like that theory, but some of the supporting evidence for that theory actually came from FNAF World, and I was pointing out that Shadow Bonnie, as far as we're aware, almost always is more of a protector role, where Shadow Freddy has always been more of an aggressor role. And my supporting evidence from FNAF World was that Shadow Freddy's moves are, as far as, I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure they were all one-hit KOs, whereas Shadow Bonnie's, if I remember correctly, were more protection-based. I'll look it up just to like be sure, but I'm pretty sure that's how it was. And of course, when I say Shadow Bonnie, I mean Adventure RWQFSFASXC. Anyway, yeah, its enemies, or its moves are Haunting, a yellow attack that can turn enemies into stone, Mimic Ball, a yellow attack that temporarily mimics every attack, and Gift Boxes, a yellow attack that revives. Right, like it's status effects, it's not direct attacks. Whereas Adventure Shadow Freddy's 3 attacks are Unscrew, an insta-kill, Escape Key, an insta-kill, and Water Hose, a very good an insta-kill that kills if they're under 30% health. So literally, like, Shadow Freddy is the most aggressive possible, whereas RXQ is status effects. And then that I use that as supporting evidence to back up to connect to other things, where like Shadow Bonnie is leading animatronics or is protecting Remnant, whereas Shadow Freddy insta-kills you, right? So I think that's where a lot of the strength of FNAF World comes from. Because we know it's in the lore, because Scott himself said he regretted connecting it to the lore, meaning it is connected to the lore. So I think the usefulness of FNAF World, especially to theorists, because the usefulness of FNAF World to everybody is that I think it's genuinely kind of fun to play. But the usefulness for theorists to FNAF World isn't necessarily the plotline of the game, or even what the game is trying to tell us, which is important to solve. But I think the usefulness is the characterization of the characters themselves, and seeing how they are treated, and seeing if you can connect anything. Like the fact that there is a move called Mimic Ball. That's important to bring up. Does it mean anything? Probably not, but it could. So you should bring it up. Right? It's possible supporting evidence. And gift boxes being a revival tool is just the same as important. So it's a good connection to make. And I don't think you're alone in taking a while to think about, because a lot of people just see FNAF World and go, oh, haha, it's the silly game, and don't think further about it. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from 42, she, they. I just watched a video with a review of Nexi, and I can't stop thinking about one thing. What if, instead of Afton inspiring the Mimic and turning him into a monster, the reverse is true? Yes, we don't have an actual plot point to fit this in, but we still have some unclear space around the moment when the average guy turns into a serial killer. And here, we have a story about the Mimic corrupting a girl into being a psychopath. We also have a story about an average guy, massive Afton vibe, who is affected by a digital abomination and gives birth to Springtrap. To prove the pattern, there's also a story about someone who turns into a serial killer while working in a mimic-infected pizzaplex. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but something bugs me about how Nexi and In the Flesh mirror each other in the way of a digital entity influences a normal person and builds them into a monster. I can clearly imagine the Mimic brainwashing Afton the same way it did with Agnes. My creator's son died in the accident, it was such a tragedy. Maybe you should build a robot with a huge robo-claw to protect your kids. And I can't stop thinking about it. So I'm sharing my thoughts, hoping to hear some opinions. Thank you for your theory. This is one of my favorite kinds of theories, in the idea that it's not immediately provable. I don't think there's a huge, like you've mentioned, there's not a huge amount of evidence for this, but also we have a big void on Afton's motivations. And the idea that Afton was inspired to kill from the Mimic is really interesting. The idea of, like, the Mimic is intelligent. We know that it has some form of intelligence, at least by the time of Ruin. So if it's collected by Afton, and it's on and on about, like, David died, blah, 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 my only hesitation is, and again, we don't have any evidence of this time period, so it's not an evidence hesitation, it's just like plot hesitation. My only hesitation is by the time William would collect the Mimic, I don't know why the Mimic would want William to turn into a monster, or try to influence William to turn into the serial killer he becomes. Because like you mentioned, my creator's son died in an accident, maybe you should build a robot with a huge robo-claw to protect your kids. That doesn't super connect. Like, there isn't really a lot of good connective tissue, right? I see the idea of, like, my creator's son died in an accident, so you should do something. I see that, but I don't see how the Funtimes connect to that really in any way. Or even the matter of, like, you should start experimenting with Remnant. How would the Mimic know about that? You know? And maybe that goes into the recent game theory that that Tom and them put out about Remnant being an experiment all the way back in the 70s because of the gas that Dolly might have as part of her person. We don't know. We don't know yet. If Edwin was looking into Remnant, then we have an avenue here. Because, like Edwin made the mimic. It was difficult to put I didn't even mean to set that one up. It's just so hard to not. Edwin made the mimic, and the mimic's main programming is being a facade of life. The mimic's main programming is, what if I made a robot that was like almost alive? So the idea of Edwin beginning research into trying to discover Remnant, trying to discover creating life, isn't implausible because he was already making digital life with the mimic. So if Edwin was doing the very early stages of research into Remnant, and the mimic learned that, then maybe that's how William learns that. That is totally possible, but we just don't have the evidence for it. And, like it was said in the game theory, maybe we see that in Secret of the Mimic. I don't know. If Dolly is mentioned to use a similar gas that we see in Pizzaplex, and if we see any notes on Remnant from Edwin, that's huge. But we don't know as of yet. So I think, I guess I would leave this theory on, I like the idea of it, but we have there's no good connection yet for why the mimic would turn William into what he becomes as of now. There's a lack of a motive here. But I like the idea, and I would be super on board with it if we had that motive, which I don't think we do yet. Maybe that's the secret of the mimic. Find out. The thing that I love about this title is we're still all scrambling to wonder what the secret of the mimic is. Like, what? My guess was it's more of a meta reference. The idea that, like, what makes the mimic work? It's programming. That's the secret of the mimic, right? And that's what we're after. I think that's our most likely thing, but maybe there's something bigger here. Maybe the secret of the mimic is it's the one that influenced William to become that monster. We don't know. We don't know. So I'm excited to see. But thank you for your question. The next one comes from Lee, and he actually had a whole bunch of questions, but they're all kind of short, so I went, yeah, sure. Our first one, do you have any old theories you think were intended to be canon in the classic FNAF 1 through 3 era? That's interesting, because usually 1 through 4, my answer is always Dream Theory, because I know it's not proven that Scott was planning Dream Theory and backtracked, but in my heart of hearts, I think he was planning Dream Theory and backtracked, regardless. The classic 1 through 3 era, any old theories you think were intended to be canon? Off the dome, I don't think it's Phone Guy's Purple Guy. Because I don't see it. I don't see the connection very well. I think it was just Phone Guy was the only human we knew of, so it's just kind of went, oh, well, I guess it's got to be that one. Yeah. I don't really... There wasn't a lot of really strong... Because here's the thing. The problem with this question, and not necessarily a problem with it, but the problem I'm having with this question is it's theories you think were intended to be canon but aren't, right? Like, if it was intended, it's implied that it isn't canon, right? And I don't think between FNAF 1, 2, and 3, there was a lot of, like, retconning or anything like that, because the story was so loose that he was just kind of weaving with the games as they came out. So, like, I think retcons may have started cropping up occasionally in 4 and 5 and all that, but, like, between the first 3 games, I don't think there was any, like, planned story where Scott was like, I want to do this. No, actually, we're doing this. So likewise, I think there were plenty of incorrect theories before 1, 2, and 3. A lot of them. Frankly, Game Theory's first ever FNAF theory about Chuck E. Cheese, I think it was a crazy coincidence. It was, admittedly, insane coincidence. Don't think that was part of the plan. And I think they even say that in the video, like, probably not intended, but it's crazy how much of this coincidence lines up. Regardless, I think there were plenty of wrong theories about FNAF 1, 2, and 3 when it was coming out. I don't think any of them were something Scott intended and then changed his mind on later. Because I don't think by that time he was already retconning stuff. I just don't think that's true. Question 2, though, in a similar vein, what is/was your favorite old FNAF theory? I was always really fond of Phone Guy Purple Guy and get a good laugh out of the old Foxy is a good guy theory. My favorite theory from that era is always going to be Foxy is a good guy because it's so funny. You're right, it's a good kick. It's so funny to think of the idea that Foxy was trying to help, but he's just so scary we get a heart attack anyway. It's such a perfect theory out of desperation to explain a bad thing about FNAF 1. Because, admittedly, Foxy's jump scare in FNAF 1, garbage. Awful. It's why there were so many meme videos of him just, saying hi and stuff. It's so funny. But there was, Foxy was a good guy. Always felt like this desperate theory of, no, guys, I promise, his shitty jump scare is intentional because he's not a bad guy. It's like the whole... FNAF 3's jump scares were intentionally bad because it's William recognizing it's Michael. That's possible. I don't think they were intentionally bad, though. Right? I think that might have been what Scott was going for and accidentally made a bad jump scare because of it. But I don't think, but I think Foxy's a good guy is the proto theory of that. That will always be my favorite. Number 3, not FNAF related, did you ever play Mouthwashing? Did you like it? What are your thoughts on it? I did. I don't know where the easiest... I think the easiest way to find it, all my stream VODs on this channel are unlisted, but they're in a public playlist. So you can find them. They were just cluttering up my channel page. And my search results more than anything. But if you go to the Stream VODs public playlist on this channel, it's in there somewhere. I did play Mouthwashing live, and I loved it. It was very, very good. I think it handled the concepts of, taking away consent really strong. Intense game, really, just a really beautifully intense game with some amazing dialogue in it. And definitely not something... I mean this in the best way. Mouthwashing is a game that I don't think I ever want to play again as long as I live. And I mean that in the best way possible. And then number 4, what is your favorite headcanon that is entirely inconsequential to the lore itself? I think Helpy is ambidextrous and likes elevator music. It soothes him. I like my Michael is bad at everything headcanon. Now, it is technically lore consequential because the theory is that, Michael was put in the FNAF 4 Nightmare Chambers for the majority of his, after Bite of 83 until, FNAF 2, and then put right back in until FNAF 1. So he's in there for, 15, 20 years, right? And I think... or I guess not 15, 20, because it's until after FNAF 1, so closer to 10. But regardless, I like the idea that Michael is so developmentally and just emotionally stunted from this that he's really bad at everything except for Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay, which is why even though he can't sneakily do stuff for William and keeps getting fired for not bathing himself, and he's just really terrible at all of this, he's incredibly skilled at surviving against animatronics. That's his one thing, and he's really good at it. I think that's such a funny headcanon. And technically it's lore consequential because of the whole, but it doesn't have to be. You're you can just assume that. I like boy failure Michael Afton. Sue me, all right? But yeah, thank you for your question, Lee. Or thank you for your questions, Lee. I think that'll do us for today, because we're past the 45-minute mark. I did take a little break in the middle, but I don't think it was too long, so I think we're close to 45 minutes. But if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into freddyfazbearpizzacapodcast@gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste, because it's a pain to type out. But until next time, as always, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.